All right, good morning, grade 7. This is my second attempt at a video. I made one early this afternoon, recorded it, uploaded it to YouTube, posted it on my lesson, and then I realized that my microphone wasn't on, so you couldn't hear anything that I was saying. So it's like 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to try it again. So we're on lesson 9.3. You'll notice in your textbook that it says that this lesson is focused on measuring angles. Now, this is a little bit tricky for us to work on measuring angles when we're not in the classroom. So what I decided to do instead is, instead of focusing on measuring angles, we're going to focus on trying to figure out how much each angle measures based on diagrams. So it's a little bit of problem solving, but you could even think of it more as puzzling, where you're given a piece of information and then you use that information to figure out other angles. So that's what our focus is going to be on. You're going to notice in all my drawings that they're not really to scale. So what I mean by that, if you were to take a protractor up to the screen and actually measure my angles, they would not exactly equal what I've said they would equal. I've made them up. So again, it's not about measuring them. It's about, let's pretend this angle equals that. Can you figure out what the other angle equals? So in order to do that, I just want to review one more time the different types of angles that we have. So you notice here that I have two parallel lines, and then we have a line cutting through it, and the line cutting through it, we call that line a transversal. Now notice that this transversal and all these rules we're going to talk about circled down here, it only works when it's cutting through two parallel lines. So if it's not parallel, it's not working, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are angles that are congruent or equal. The way I think about corresponding angles is I pretend that I shift my angles up and right on top of each other. So what you can do is you can pretend that this line over here shifts all the way up to this line. And you'll notice, you can even just see it, that angles 2 and 6 would be corresponding, they'd be equal. If you put them right on top of each other and you shifted the parallel line up, they would be equal. So those ones are corresponding. Other corresponding angles are 1 and 5. Those ones correspond. Then we have 3 and 7. And then finally we have 4 and 8. Okay, so corresponding angles, think of those ones as being the ones that shift up next towards each other. Then we have alternate interior angles. So alternate, I want you to think opposite sides. And then interior, like I think I said in my other video, think about the interior of your house. So some people say they want to be interior designers. They're working on designing the inside of a house. So we're working in between these parallel lines. So alternate interior angles would be 5 and 4. They're opposite each other. They're inside the parallel lines and they are equal. Then we have another set of alternate interior, 6 and 3. Then we have the alternate exterior. So again, we're on the outside of those parallel lines. So 7 and 2, they're on opposite sides. And they're on the exterior. Those are alternate exterior angles that are congruent. And then 8 and 1 are congruent. Remember, congruent means equal. Our last kind of angle relationships we have here are vertical angles, or also you can think of them as opposite angles. So when you have two intersecting lines, the angles right across from each other are equal. So 7 and 6 are equal, 5 and 8 are equal, and then you can figure out the same thing from the top. So this is information that will be helpful for us as we solve problems later on in your actual lesson. Then I want to highlight talking about triangles. So triangles, mathematicians have discovered that no matter what triangle you measure anywhere on the earth, the three angles inside will always equal to 180 degrees. This is actually pointing to God, our creator, and how he has created order, that things are the same, that it allows us as mathematicians to figure things out. So if I know that all triangles, all their angles inside together will equal 180 degrees, if I'm given two pieces of information, two angles, I can figure out the third one. So let's call the third one X. Notice here the symbol, this is just a reminder, that symbol means that it is 90 degrees. So right now I have 90 degrees and 40 degrees. So I already have 130 degrees of my triangle accounted for. So then I can just do some subtraction, and I can find out that x equals 50 degrees because they all add up to 180. Now, if you want, again, you might not want to, but I just want to show you that we could also have the statement that x plus 40 plus 90 equals 180 degrees. So you could solve this algebraically as well. So x plus 130 equals 180. X plus 130 minus 130 equals 180 minus 130, which I don't quite have room for. And then you would get x equals 50 degrees. So it's not that you need to solve it algebraically, I just want to show you how algebra works in this situation. Here we have another one. So once again, we're given two of our angles and we want to find A. So I can add them up together. So far you can think of it as I've used 160 degrees out of my 180 degrees, and then there's about 20 degrees left. So let's take a look at a more complex problem. So the tricky thing about learning geometry is it's not like other mathematical lessons. So for example, when I first taught you algebra, I showed you 5 different examples, and then you did 10 on your own of the same kind. The thing with geometry is I can show you a couple different problems, but then you actually have to go and apply the skill yourself. So I'm going to walk you through 2 problems and sort of my logic and my reasoning in order to solve this. And then in your own work, you're going to have to solve some on your own using the same type of logic and reasoning, but using a different problem. So let's say I want to find x here. And while I'm at it, I might as well also find y. Now, if you look here, there's a lot of different angles going on. But the important thing is to start with, well, what do I know? I know up here that my angle right in here is 55 degrees. Then I think back to those angles that I reviewed earlier with you. I think of opposite angles, corresponding angles, and things like that. And I notice that over here, I have parallel line L and parallel line M. And then cutting right through it is a transversal. So that means if I were to shift angle Y up, it would actually be corresponding with my 55 degree angle. Remember, this is the one where we can just shift it up and we can see if we were to slide our parallel line up, they would match. So therefore, I know that angle Y is 55 degrees. Now that helps me in finding angle X because I can think about supplementary angles. I didn't review that so much on this lesson, but supplementary angles are 2 angles that together equal 180 degrees. So if I look at Y and I look at X, I notice that they're a linear pair. They're right beside each other, and together they equal 180 degrees. So if I already know that Y is 55, I can simply subtract it from 180, and I would get 125 degrees. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Notice I didn't really think about the right angles. I didn't think about all the stuff up here. I started with what I knew, and then looked how could I get that to help me solve something else. Okay, let's go on to an even more complex one. So here I'm only given the names of 2 angles, and then I actually have to solve for 6 of them. So I'm going to do that step by step. So I'm going to start with looking at the 70 degrees. Now you might start by looking at the 135. It doesn't matter. We'll get to the same answer either way. And I notice that A is directly opposite from 70 degrees. So those are opposite angles, which are also known as vertical angles. And I know that they are congruent or equal. So I already know that angle A is 70 degrees. Then I take a look at angle B, and I notice that angle B is a linear pair with 135 degrees, which is another way of saying that B and 135 are supplementary. So I know because they're supplementary that together they must equal 180 degrees. So I can do some subtraction. And I can figure out that angle B is actually 45 degrees. So far I've applied my knowledge about opposite or vertical angles, and then also about supplementary angles. Now I can apply my knowledge about triangles. And I know that triangles together add up to 180 degrees. So what I can do is I can add up the angles I already know. So I already know that I've sort of used up, that's how I like to think of it, 115 degrees. So now I can just do some subtraction. I've used up 115 degrees. So I am left with angle C is 65 degrees. Okay, so again, I've used 3 different pieces of information that I've learned. I've used vertical angles, supplementary, and then my knowledge about triangles. The next piece of information I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that 70-degree angle, the original one right over here. And I'm going to notice that this angle is actually, oh, I'm forgetting the word. Come on. Corresponding. This is why I shouldn't do math late at night. Corresponding angles. So 70 degrees and E are corresponding. So I can just think of sliding that 70 right on up, and I know that E is 70 degrees. That helps me solve F because F and E are supplementary once again. So I can do 180, take away 70, and I get 110 degrees. Then I only have one more left. Well, if I look carefully, I will notice that D, C, and E all together make a straight line. So all 3 of those together equals 180. So I'm going to add up my 70 and my 65, and I get 135. So I've already used that up of my 180. So then I can do some subtraction, and I will get 45 degrees. Okay. So grade 7, when you approach problems like this, it looks overwhelming at first, but you really just need to use simple pieces of information that you know about angles. When you get to your assignment today, make sure you note that there are letters to deal with. Ooh, this is weird. Letters. What kind of pen am I on? Letters, there's numbers, and then there's also an additional worksheet. Okay, you can do that worksheet. You don't need to print it off. You may if you like, but if you don't have access to a printer, feel free to just write the answers down in your notebook so that we can mark it the next day. So pay attention to the 3 different things on your lesson. Don't miss out on any of them. Feel free to give me a call if you have any questions or to chat with me. Have a great day.